The stars were dying, not in the quiet, gentle way of nature, but as though some unseen hand had crushed their light in sudden violence. The void was filled with their last screams, the red flare of collapsing giants, the cold embers of extinguished suns drifting into nothing. All around Cadia, the sky itself seemed wounded. The constellations that had once guided fleets for millennia now burned broken, their shapes scattered like bones cast by a careless god. From the shattered heights of Castra Mirak's western bastion, Lord Marshal Kyle Venar gazed outward. In the air, the tang of ozone still clung, like a wound that would not close. Below him, the ruins of Cadia's proud cities sprawled in silence, broken spires bowing toward the black earth. It was not merely the planet that lay in ruin. It was an idea. The fortress world that had stood for 10,000 years as the sentinel of the Imperium was bleeding out beneath his feet. For 3 centuries, or perhaps it had been longer, for immortality makes a mockery of time, Kyle had fought and bled for this world. He had defended it against orcs, against heretics, against the endless chittering swarms that fell like rain from the stars. But nothing in his long years had prepared him for this. The slow, inexorable truth that Cadia was dying, not because of a single battle lost, but because the galaxy itself was rotting around it. In the distance, a tear in reality, the Eye of Terror, pulsed like a wound in the void. Its light was not the gold of the Emperor's blessing, but the shifting, oily colors of madness. It seemed closer now than it had the day before. Each pulse of its storm carried with it a whisper, a reminder of oaths broken and friends lost. Somewhere deep inside, Cale could still hear the voice of Captain Rin Talvor, his closest companion, the man who had once sworn to stand with him to the end, as it had sounded the day he turned his guns upon Cale's own troops. The memory stung like a fresh wound. But you, watching this, must know, this story is not just mine. We tell these tales because we care for you, because the galaxy is vast and cruel, and in its shadows, it is easy to forget that you are not alone. Before we begin the journey in earnest, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, take your seat, pour yourself a strong coffee, and let us begin. Kyle drew a slow breath. It tasted of dust and iron. Around him, the remnants of the 132nd Cadian stood at attention, their eyes empty, their faces drawn. They were young, far too young, and yet they had been forged in fire since the day they could hold a laser gun. He wondered if any of them would live to see the next sunrise, and if it mattered. Behind him, the bastion's gates groaned open. Lady Seraphine approached, her black cloak trailing through the dust. She moved like a shadow in human form, elegant, unhurried, her presence cutting through the stagnant air. Her eyes, the color of old amber, fixed on him without warmth, but with a familiarity that was almost intimate. "My lord," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that matched the ruin around them. "The High Command sends new orders. We are to withdraw." The words hung between them like the toll of a funeral bell. Withdraw. Kyle turned his gaze from the Eye of Terror to her, his expression unreadable. "And leave Cadia to burn." "It already burns," Seraphine replied, her voice steady. "The order is signed. They call it a strategic redeployment. They claim there is more value in preserving what remains of our forces than in defending a corpse." Cale's jaw tightened. He had heard such language before, the careful, bloodless words of those who had never felt mud and ash beneath their boots, who counted victories in numbers on parchment. "Cadia is not a corpse," he said. It is the shield of the Imperium. If it falls, the galaxy will do what it has always done, she interrupted. It will turn, it will adapt, and it will forget. Her words cut deeper than any blade, because in some quiet place within him, Kyle feared she was right. He had outlived too many empires not to know the truth. Nothing is eternal, no matter how sacred. And yet, he could not abandon this place, not after everything it had cost. He turned back toward the void. The warp storm swelled, and in its depths something shifted. A shadow within shadows, vast and formless. He felt its gaze upon him. It was not the gaze of the ruinous powers, though it was older than them. There was an intelligence there, patient and calculating, like a predator studying wounded prey. Seraphine stepped closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "There is another way," she murmured, "a way to hold the gate, but it will mean breaking the oldest of oaths." Kyle did not look at her, though her words rooted in his mind. "Speak." "There are relics beneath this world," she said. "Machines built by those who walked the stars before mankind had learned fire. You have seen them, the pylons that stand in the wastes. They are not ours, nor the Emperor's. But they can wound the warp itself. If we could awaken them." He knew of the pylons. Every Cadian did. They had stood for longer than history, their purpose whispered of, but never confirmed. The thought of touching them, of working with the ancient hands that had made them, was heresy in its purest form. And yet, the warp storm loomed larger every hour. Kyle turned to face her fully now, studying her as one might study a blade, testing the sharpness, weighing the risk. "You speak of powers older than chaos itself," he said. "What you ask would mark me as traitor to the Imperium." Seraphine's expression did not change. "Better a living traitor than a dead loyalist." The words struck like a hammer blow. He felt the old conflict within him stir, the pull between oaths sworn and the cold mathematics of survival. For centuries, he had served without question. But centuries of service also meant centuries of watching good men die in wars that never ended. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant roar of artillery. The siege had already begun. Kyle closed his eyes for a heartbeat, letting the weight of the decision settle upon him. When he opened them, the world seemed darker, the light of Cadia's sun already fading behind smoke and cloud. "Gather the council," he said at last. "If we are to break our oaths, then let it be done with our eyes open." Seraphine inclined her head, the faintest flicker of something, satisfaction, passing through her gaze. Then she turned and disappeared into the shadow of the gates. Alone again, Kyle looked once more upon the wound in the sky. It pulsed in silence, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw movement. The outline of a figure, impossibly distant, standing within the storm, watching him. He wondered if it was the future he was seeing, or the end. The war council assembled in the shadow of the bastion's ruined vault. The chamber had once been a place of ceremony, where banners hung proud, and the air thrummed with the iron certainty of Cadian discipline. Now the banners were tattered, the great stone pillars cracked, and the scent of damp and smoke clung to every surface. Lord Marshal Cale Vaynar stood at the head of the long, scarred table, his armor still dusted with the ash of the morning bombardment. Around him, the last embers of Cadia's high command gathered, weary faces carved in stone, eyes dulled by too many campaigns. General Markov sat rigid, his hands clenched into fists. He had commanded 3 regiments during the Black Crusade, and each had been ground down to ash beneath the tides of war. Across from him, Colonel Ilara Voss, the youngest of them, leaned forward with the intensity of a drawn blade. Others muttered in the corners, their conversations fragments of worry and bitter memory. Lady Seraphine entered without announcement, her boots silent on the cracked marble. The faint scent of ozone seemed to follow her, as if she had passed through some invisible storm on her way. She took her place to Kale's right, her presence both a shadow and a weapon. Kyle began without ceremony. Segmentum Command has ordered our withdrawal. A murmur rippled through the chamber, low but sharp. Markov slammed a fist against the table. Cowards, the gate will be lost. They call it redeployment, Ilara said bitterly. A fine word for running away. Kyle's gaze swept the table. I will not lie to you. If we obey, Cadia will fall. If we remain, we will be destroyed. Those are the choices the Imperium leaves us. Markov leaned forward, voice tight. Then we hold, my lord. Better to die with Cadia than to crawl away and watch the eyes spill into the galaxy. Kale heard the conviction in the general's voice, and for a moment it resonated with something deep in his bones. Yet it was Seraphine who spoke next, her tone calm, almost conversational. There is another path, she said, one the Imperium will not speak of. The pylons. The Ancient Ones left them here for a reason. They can wound the warp itself. Silence fell like a blade. Every officer in the room knew of the pylons, their black monoliths rising from the Cadian wastes like the teeth of some forgotten god. They had stood longer than human history, untouched, unmovable. To speak of using them was heresy, the kind that would see an entire bloodline erased. Colonel Voss broke the silence. You would have us consort with the Xenos who built them? Seraphine's amber eyes met hers without flinching. I would have us survive. Markov spat the word as though it were poison. At what cost? You know as well as I do who forged those stones. They are older than chaos itself. To awaken them is to invite doom of another kind. Perhaps, Seraphine allowed. But if we do nothing, the doom we face is certain. The argument unfurled, sharp and heated. Kyle let it flow around him for a time, his mind half in the room and half elsewhere. The voices of his council were overlaid by others. Softer, older, impossible. Whispers curling like smoke in the corners of his mind. Kyle. The sound was faint, almost delicate, yet it cut through the noise like a blade through silk. He turned his head slightly, as if to locate the source, but the council continued oblivious. Stu, you swore, and you broke it. It was a voice he knew, Rin Talvor's, clear as it had been the day they had fought side by side in the Valley of Glass. Only Rin had been dead for almost 2 centuries. Kyle had seen his body burned. He flexed his gauntleted hand beneath the table, feeling the tremor that came when the past reached too far into the present. Markov's voice brought him back. And I will not be led by whispers and heresies, while there's still a gun in my hand. Kyle raised a hand, and the chamber fell to silence. Enough. His voice was quiet, but it carried. The pylons are a weapon, perhaps the only one left to us. I will not deny their use because of old oaths, when the enemy we face is older still. Markov stared at him, disbelief etched into every line of his face. You would throw your soul to the warp to save this world? Kyle met his gaze without blinking. If that is the cost, then I will pay it. The council broke soon after, the officers scattering in small knots, their whispers trailing through the ruined hall. Markov left without a word. Ilara paused at the doorway, her expression unreadable. Be careful, my lord, she said softly. Some enemies do not wear the faces of foes. When they were gone, Seraphine remained at his side. You heard him again, didn't you? Kyle stiffened. What do you mean? I see it in your eyes, she said. When the dead speak to you, it is not the first time. He turned away, unwilling to confirm or deny. The truth was harder to bury when she was near. Immortality had not granted him peace, only a longer list of ghosts. They came to him in dreams, in waking hours, in the pause between breaths. Sometimes they accused him, sometimes they begged him, sometimes, as with Rin, they simply watched. Ghosts have nothing to say worth hearing, Kyle muttered. Seraphine's smile was faint and sharp. Not always. She reached into her cloak and drew out a small shard of black crystal. It pulsed faintly, as though with a heartbeat. This was taken from one of the pylons, a fragment no larger than a knife blade, yet it hums with power. Imagine what 1,000 standing stones could do if awakened. Kyle studied it, feeling the air around it vibrate. It was cold, not the cold of winter, but the absence of warmth entirely. The same sensation as the void beyond the hull of a ship. You've already begun, he said. Of course, she replied. I would not speak of it otherwise. Outside, the sky rumbled, not with thunder, but with the deep, resonant roar of void ships breaking atmosphere. Reinforcements? Number Kyle knew the sound too well. The enemy had come. He closed his hand around the shard, its chill biting into his flesh. Then we have little time. Seraphine inclined her head. Less than you think. In the distance, over the plains beyond Castermyrak, the first streaks of crimson fire split the sky. Beneath the crust of Cadia, deeper than any fortress's foundations, far below the reach of human miners and mechanicus drills, a world slept in silence. Black vaults stretched for miles, their walls inscribed with the script of a race that had ruled the stars before Terra knew the warmth of a sun. For 60 million years they had slumbered here, entombed in metal and shadow, waiting for a signal that had never come. That signal came now. The ground trembled with a slow, deliberate rhythm, not from the shells falling on the surface above, but from within the earth itself. One by one, great slabs of living metal shifted aside, opening corridors long sealed. Green light pulsed in the dark, like veins filled with some strange, alien blood. In the heart of the deepest vault lay a figure seated upon a throne of black stone. His form was not flesh, but a perfect, merciless imitation wrought in necrodermis. A tall crown curved from his skull, its edges like the points of a crescent moon. Across his chest, inlaid sigils burned faintly as systems long dormant flared to life. His eyes, twin embers of balefire, ignited. Overlord Akantar had awoken. His mind, vast and cold, stretched outward, not into the warp, but through the lattice of ancient networks buried beneath Cadia's skin. He remembered the last time he had walked these corridors, the last war, when the Citan still whispered promises of eternity and the galaxy burned under their gaze. Back then, Cadia had been little more than molten rock, unformed, uninhabited. That it now teemed with life was irrelevant. All life was transient. What mattered was the wound in the sky above, the eye of terror. Its presence bled instability into the fabric of reality, corrupting the great work the Necrons had wrought in the war in heaven. The pylons had been placed here to hold that wound shut, to keep the old war from reigniting, and now they were failing. Akantar rose from his throne, each movement silent but heavy with purpose. Around him, the Lich Guard stirred, their halberds gleaming in the sickly green light. They had been his companions for eons, their loyalty absolute, their thoughts as still as the dead stars. Protocol Sigma 7. Akantar's voice echoed in the metallic tongue of the Necrontyr, reverberating through the vault like the strike of a bell. The gate must be sealed, no matter the cost. On the surface, Kyle Vaynar stood upon the ramparts of Casa Mirak, unaware that the ground beneath him was no longer silent. The enemy bombardment had intensified. The horizon was a jagged wall of fire and smoke. Through the ash-choked air, drop pods screamed downward, carving molten lines through the clouds. "Marshal," Colonel Voss called from the western watchtower. "The traitors have breached the outer defense line." Kyle's gauntlet tightened on the shard Seraphine had given him. The cold of it had not diminished. It seemed almost colder now, as if reacting to something unseen. He turned toward the colonel, his voice a calm anchor amid the chaos. "Hold them. Buy me time." "For what?" Voss demanded, her face streaked with soot. Kyle didn't answer. He had no time to explain the shape of the choice before him, nor the presence he could feel, faint but deliberate, somewhere deep below. It was not a warp sense. It was older, mechanical, patient. Seraphine appeared beside him, her eyes drawn toward the burning horizon. "It's awake," she said, as if speaking of an old acquaintance. "You mean the builders of your precious pylons?" Kyle replied. She did not deny it. "Overlord Akantar of the Silent Dynasty. He will not know your face. He will not care for your oaths, but he may yet care for the gate." Kyle studied her profile, her calm amid the slaughter. "And what does he care for beyond that?" Seraphine's lips curved slightly. "Survival. In that, you are the same." Below the fortress, the first waves of traitor marines clashed with the Cadian lines. The thunder of their bolters echoed through the valley, punctuated by the deeper roar of battle tanks firing into the enemy mass. Kale felt the shard pulse once in his hand, a brief flare of alien energy. For an instant, his vision shifted, the walls of the bastion fading into translucent ghost metal, the earth beneath replaced by a vision of endless black corridors lit by green fire. A figure stood at the far end, crowned and still, watching him with unblinking eyes. And then it was gone. "I will need a path to him," Kyle said at last. Seraphine inclined her head. "The tombs are beneath the western wastes. But once you go, there is no turning back. You will be beyond the reach of Imperial law, or protection." Kyle looked once more at the sky. The eye of terror pulsed in time with the shard in his palm. "Perhaps it's time I stepped beyond it." Far below, Akantar moved through his awakening legions, the air shimmering around his form. The cryptex walked in his shadow, their staffs whispering with coruscating energy. They reported the status of the pylons. Degraded, partially dormant, their power stifled by millennia of neglect and the interference of the warp. "They must be reawakened," Akantar commanded. "Bring the gate into balance." One of the cryptex hesitated. "Lord, the surface is infested with the lesser race. They have built their cities atop our works. They will not yield willingly." "Then they will yield unwillingly," Akantar replied. There was no anger in his tone, only inevitability. Above, as Kale descended from the ramparts, the fortress shuddered, not from enemy fire this time, but from somewhere deeper, a tremor that seemed to rise from the bones of the world itself. Voss met him at the gate, confusion flickering in her eyes. "That wasn't artillery. What in the throne's name is moving under us?" Kyle gave the only answer he could. "The past." The war room of Castra Murak stank of Promethean fumes and fear. Its walls were cut from ancient rockcrete, reinforced by layers of plasteel and faith. Yet even here the distant bombardment made dust sift from the ceiling in a slow, steady fall, like the hourglass of a dying world. Around the central hollow table, the senior officers of the Cadian 122nd stood in a loose ring, their armor scratched and dented from days of unbroken combat. Maps flickered in pale green, studded with crimson points that crept steadily toward the fortress symbol at the center. Marshal Kyle Vaynar entered in silence, the cold shard still hidden beneath his gauntlet. Conversation died. The eyes of his officers followed him as one might watch a knife being drawn. "Report," he said. Colonel Voss stepped forward, her voice clipped. "Outer line is gone. Second trench network is compromised in 3 sectors. We've lost Vox contact with the 9th Armored. Enemy gunships have air superiority. If we don't fall back to the bastion walls within the next 6 hours..." "We hold," Kyle interrupted. "To the last man, if necessary." A murmur passed among the officers. Some straightened at the steel in his voice. Others exchanged weary, doubtful glances. From the far end of the table, Commissar Duren's voice cut in, cold as a blade. "The men will hold, if their commanders do. But there are whispers, Marshal. They say you walk with a Xenos sorceress, that you speak of bargains not sanctioned by the throne." The air in the chamber grew taut. Kyle met the Commissar's gaze without flinching. "I speak of survival." Darren's lip curled. "Survival without loyalty is treachery. Survival bought with heresy is damnation." Before Kale could reply, the chamber doors hissed open. Seraphine entered, her presence as quiet and inevitable as a shadow stretching at dusk. No guards had stopped her, either because she moved unseen or because the guards no longer cared to try. "You speak of heresy," she said to Darren, her voice soft, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "But it is heresy that will hold your precious gate closed. Your faith will not stop the wound in the sky from bleeding your reality dry." Darren's hand twitched toward his bolt pistol. "Marshal." "Stand down," Kale said. The Commissar's eyes narrowed. "You are dangerously close to..." "I'm already beyond danger," Kyle said. "We all are. The pylons beneath Cadia were built to keep the eye from tearing the galaxy apart. They are failing. And beneath our feet walks the one who can repair them. A being whose existence your catechisms do not even acknowledge." The room was silent, but for the faint hum of the holomap. The officers looked from Kyle to Seraphine, to one another, as if waiting for someone to speak the truth they feared. Voss broke the silence. "And you mean to meet with this thing?" Kale's voice was steady. "Yes, alone, if need be. The alternative is watching Cadia burn while the eye grows wide enough to swallow terror itself." Darren stepped forward, his boots grinding on the metal deck. "If you go down into those tombs, you go without the Emperor's blessing. You will be cut from the chain of command, and if you return, it will be in chains. Or not at all." Kyle didn't blink. "So be it." The Commissar's jaw tightened. For a moment, Kyle thought the man might draw his weapon then and there. But Darren only turned sharply on his heel and stalked out, his cape snapping behind him. When the door closed, Voss exhaled slowly. "Marshal, if you go, who commands here?" "You do," Kyle said. "Hold as long as you can. Delay the traitors. Do not expect me back before the 3rd moonrise." She studied him for a long moment, then gave a single, stiff nod. "Cadia stands." "Cadia stands," he echoed. The western wastes were a graveyard of stone and ash, the air choked with the dust of bombardment. Kyle rode alone, his rebreather hissing softly with each breath. The cold shard in his palm was his compass, pulsing faintly whenever he veered from the unseen path toward the tomb. The sky was a bruised red, lit by the flare of distant orbital fire. Each explosion cast jagged shadows across the half-buried pylons that jutted from the earth like broken teeth. As he descended into a fissure, the sounds of war above grew muted. The air grew colder, drier, until it felt like breathing in a tomb, which, he realized, it was. Black metal walls emerged from the rock, seamless and vast. Glyphs pulsed faintly as if stirred from long sleep. The fissure widened into a corridor that stretched beyond the range of his helm's lights. He was not alone. Figures emerged from the shadows, tall, inhuman, their forms wrought of the same black metal as the walls. Their eyes glowed green, their weapons humming with restrained power. They made no move to attack. Instead, they turned as one and began to walk deeper into the corridor. Kyle followed. They led him into a vast chamber whose ceiling vanished into darkness. At its center stood a single throne of black stone, and upon it, Overlord Akantar. The Necron rose, his movements silent, yet carrying the weight of inevitability. "You bear my shard," Akantar said, his voice resonant, layered, as if many voices spoke in unison. Kyle held it up, the cold biting into his gauntlet. "I was told you could restore the pylons." "They will be restored," Akantar said, "but all that dwells above will be swept aside. Flesh is a temporary imperfection. This world will be returned to its purpose." Kyle's grip on the shard tightened. "That world is my people." "They are not yours," Akantar said. "They are dust borrowed from a dying star. They are noise in the signal. Remove the noise, and the purpose is pure." Kyle stepped closer. "If Cadia falls, the eye will widen. Chaos will pour through, and when it reaches your tombs, it will not matter how pure your purpose was." Akantar was silent for a long moment. The green fire of his eyes dimmed slightly, then flared again. "You offer alliance, human." "I offer necessity," Kyle said. "We seal the gate. We drive back the enemy. Then you vanish beneath your earth, and I return to my war." Akantar regarded him with the stillness of a mountain. "Agreed. But know this. When the war above ends, the war below will begin." I expected nothing less. The Overlord inclined his head. "Then it is done." Far above, in the war room, Commissar Darren watched the horizon from the fortress balcony. He did not see Kale's return. Instead, he saw the first of the Necron monoliths rise from the western wastes, their silhouettes vast and terrible against the burning sky. He smiled thinly. "So it begins." The first sight of the monoliths broke the sky like jagged obsidian spears. They rose from the wasteland in utter silence, each the size of a fortress keep, their edges bleeding emerald light into the ash-heavy air. For a heartbeat, the battlefield froze. Guardsman and heretic alike stared upward, their war briefly forgotten. Then the weapons of the monoliths awoke. Lances of green lightning cut through the horizon, shearing traitor armor in half, boiling flesh from bone and turning the ground itself to glass. From the fortress wall, Colonel Voss watched in stunned disbelief. "Emperor's mercy," she whispered. "Not mercy," Commissar Darren said at her side. "A different predator." The Vox crackled. "This is Marshal Vaynar to all loyal units. Hold positions. Do not engage the constructs. Repeat, hold fire. They are not here for you." Voss's jaw tightened. She didn't like the sound of that "not yet" hidden in his tone. Marshal Kale rode at the head of a small column emerging from the wastes, himself Seraphine gliding silently beside him, and a contingent of Necron immortals in rigid formation. The immortals moved with mechanical perfection, their heavy gorse blasters cradled as if they were extensions of their very limbs. They paid no mind to the humans they passed, nor to the battlefield strewn with corpses and burning wrecks. A squad of Cadian infantry, dug into a trench, stared in frozen shock as Cale passed. One young trooper clutched his laser gun so tightly his knuckles went white. "Marshal," the trooper stammered. "What in throne's name?" "Stand your ground, soldier," Cale said without slowing. "They're not your enemy today." The soldier swallowed hard, but obeyed. His eyes, though, never left the alien forms as they marched past. At the fortress gates, the Necrons did not slow. Voss gave the order to open the bastion doors, though every fibre of her wanted to slam them shut. The great adamantine gates groaned wide, and the alien host entered without a glance at the defenders who lined the walls, laser guns trembling in their hands. Kyle dismounted and approached Voss. "The pylons will be restored, but the enemy will not wait for us to finish the work. I need every man and gun ready to hold the outer sectors." "You brought them here," Voss said, her voice low and hard. "Do you understand what it means to have them inside Cadia's heart?" "I understand that without them, we're dead already," Cale replied. Seraphine's gaze drifted over the parapets, her eyes unreadable. "The Necrons have no interest in your throne or your faith, only in their task. But if you falter in holding the line..." She let the words hang, like a knife suspended over the garrison's throat. Beneath the fortress, deep in the labyrinthine tunnels that predated even Cadia's oldest records, the work began. Akantar himself descended into the central pylon chamber. A cavern so vast, the pillars vanished into shadow far above. Ancient machinery, black and green, pulsed faintly, as if waking from a million-year slumber. Necron engineers, Canoptech constructs shaped like scuttling insects of metal, swarmed over the pylons, their legs clicking on stone, their cutting beams etching symbols Kyle could not comprehend. "This will take time," Akantar said, without looking at him. "The wound in your reality is undeep." "How long?" Kyle asked. 3 rotations of your star." Kyle clenched his jaw. "We may not have that long." Above ground, the traitor legions rallied. The sudden destruction wrought by the monoliths had stalled them, but now their warbands regrouped, driven by the iron will of their chaos masters. From the fortress wall, Voss watched the distant lines shift and reform. They're probing the flanks, looking for weakness. Darren stood beside her, his hands clasped behind his back. They will find it, and when they do, the Necrons will not hold it for you. They are not allies, Colonel. They are opportunists. "I know," she said, "but if the Marshal trusts them..." "The Marshal," Duran interrupted, "has already crossed the threshold from loyalty into something else. When this is over, you will have to decide which side you are on." That night, the fortress shook under the first true counteroffensive. Siege guns roared in the dark, their shells slamming into the bastion walls with thunderous force. Traitor artillery lit the sky in arcs of crimson fire. Voss barked orders from the parapet. "First and second companies, shift to the eastern wall. Keep those heavy bolters fed." On the ground below, Necron phalanxes moved with unerring discipline, their green beams carving through the advancing heretics. The enemy faltered under their fire, but the traitor artillery didn't care what it hit. Shells exploded among both human and Necron lines, sending men screaming and alien machines staggering under the blasts. Kyle fought in the thick of it, his power sword cutting down a world-eater berserker who had breached the line. As the corpse fell, Kyle turned to see Seraphine watching him from the shadows of a ruined barricade. "You bleed for a fortress that will not thank you," she said. "I bleed for Cadia," he replied. She tilted her head. "Cadia is a rock. Its people are dust. Yet you cling to it as if the rock loves you back." Kyle's grip on his sword tightened. Better to cling to stone than to nothing. 2 days passed. The repairs to the pylons neared completion, though Kyle could see the strain in Akantar's mechanical stillness, a subtle stiffness that hinted at urgency. On the third night, the traitor push came with full fury. Warp storms tore the sky open above the battlefield, spilling horrors into reality. Demons swarmed the walls, their claws rending stone. The air reeked of blood and ozone. From the battlements, Voss saw the line buckling. "We can't hold them!" Below, the Necrons fought with tireless precision, but the sheer press of the enemy began to force them back. For every demon or traitor they cut down, 2 more emerged from the warp-lit dust. Kyle stood at the gate, rallying a knot of exhausted guardsmen. "Hold the gate!" he shouted, voice raw. A bloodthirster, vast, winged, its axe dripping, molten gore, crashed into the Necron flank. The Immortals fired in unison, their beams carving smoking gouges in its flesh, but the demon only roared and struck back with world-shaking force. Akantar himself strode into its path, war scythe blazing. The 2 titans clashed in a storm of light and shadow, their blows sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Deep within the fortress, the last pylon flared to life. The green light that poured from its surface was blinding, cutting through the warp-born storm above like a spear of order through chaos. The demons screamed, their forms unraveling in the harsh radiance. Warp rifts began to close, sucking horrors back into the void from which they came. But not all withdrew willingly. The bloodthirster, locked in combat with Akantar, howled in defiance. Kyle saw the opportunity and charged. He drove his blade into the demon's side as Akantar's war scythe cleaved down. The creature split in a flare of red light, its death cry shaking the stones. When the last echo faded, the battlefield lay still. The enemy had fallen back, their surviving warbands retreating into the wastes. The pylons pulsed steadily now, their ancient song restored. Above, the eye's stormfront receded slightly, its bleeding edge held back. For now. Kyle stood in the ruin of the gate, blood seeping from a wound in his side. Akantar approached, his towering form framed in the pylon's glow. "The wound is closed, for this age. Our pact is fulfilled." Kyle nodded. "And now?" "Now," Akantar said, "the war below begins." Without another word, the Necron forces began to withdraw, their forms vanishing into the earth as silently as they had emerged. On the wall, Voss exhaled. "They're leaving." Darren's eyes narrowed. "For now." As the dust settled, Kyle felt Seraphine's presence at his side. "You've bought Cadia time," she said. "But every bargain has a cost." "I know," he said. Her smile was faint, almost sad. "Good. Then you're ready for the next one." The silence after the battle was unnatural. Not the weary quiet of victors catching breath, but the hollow stillness of a place abandoned by its keepers. From the fortress wall, Colonel Voss watched the last flickers of emerald light vanish into the cracks of the earth. The Necrons had gone without a word, leaving no trace save the restored pylons and the glassy scars of their weapon fire. "Like they were never here," one guardsman muttered. "Wrong," Commissar Darren replied sharply. "They were here. and that shadow will remain long after they've vanished. Marshal Kale moved through the fortress courtyard, his side still bound from the bloodthirsters' strike. Every step was a reminder that survival had not come cheaply. The garrison's survivors milled about in small clusters, guardsmen tending wounds, tech priests chanting, Binharik over damaged guns, Medici dragging the broken into the infirmary. Seraphine glided alongside him like a ghost. They fear the silence more than the battle. Kyle said nothing. His gaze was fixed on the fortress gates, where scavenger crews were already hauling the dead into piles. In the distance, the wastes shimmered with heat and dust, empty of any sign of the chaos host. "Too easy," he murmured. The first reports came within hours. An engineer team, dispatched to inspect the lower vaults, failed to return. Their Vox transmission ended mid-sentence, cut off by what sounded like a metallic shriek. Voss summoned Kyle to the command chamber. "We've lost contact with 3 patrols in the underworks," she said, stabbing a finger at a schematic of the fortress foundations. "Down here, levels we thought sealed centuries ago. Could be stray traitors who slipped inside during the siege," Kyle suggested. "Or something the Necrons left behind," Darren countered. The word hung heavy over the room. Kyle armed himself and took a squad below. The descent was a crawl through black corridors slick with condensation. The air grew colder, the walls more ancient, built not by the Imperium, but by hands that had shaped stone before humanity had ever dreamed of stars. Faint green light bled from cracks in the walls. The men muttered prayers under their breath. They found the first engineer in a side chamber. His body was untouched, but his eyes were gone, empty sockets staring at nothing. His Vox bead was still active, whispering static that almost sounded like words. "Emperor, preserve us," one trooper murmured. Kyle knelt, examining the corpse. No sign of weapon impact. No blood. Seraphine's voice drifted from the shadows. The Necrons left more than pylons. They left guardians. The deeper they went, the more signs they found. Doors melted shut by some unknown energy. Footprints of bare metal feet, the lingering scent of ozone. Then the corridor opened into a vast chamber. In its center stood a single black obelisk, pulsing with slow green light. Around it, 3 figures knelt. Not human, not fully Necron, but something in between. Their flesh was stretched over metallic frames, their eyes glowing like trapped suns. What in the throne's name? Voss's voice cracked over the Vox. The hybrids turned as one, moving with an uncanny grace. Kyle raised his weapon. Contact! The first one leapt, impossibly fast. It crashed into the nearest trooper, snapping his neck before the man could scream. Lasfire stitched across its torso, but the shot sizzled harmlessly against its skin. Kyle's sword carved through another, sparks and blood spraying in equal measure. The creature hissed in Binharik and High Gothic at once, its voice layered with 2 alien tones. When the last one fell, Seraphine stepped forward to the obelisk. "These are echoes, experiments. Your fortress sits atop a vault the Necrons have claimed for themselves." Back in the command chamber, the argument began. "We seal the lower levels and purge them with melter charges," Voss insisted. "We don't even know how deep it goes," Kale countered. "And if the pylons draw power from below, destroying the vault could undo everything." Darren slammed his fist on the table. "Listen to yourselves. You're debating how much of our soul to sell to keep this deal alive." Seraphine's expression was unreadable. "You misunderstand. The deal is already sealed. If you sever the vault from the pylons, The barrier against the eye will fall. And you'd let Cadia burn, Voss snapped. I would watch it burn, Seraphine said softly. If the alternative is what sleeps below waking fully. That night, Kyle couldn't sleep. He stood alone on the eastern parapet, the wind carrying the faint scent of ozone from the wastes. He heard Darren's boots before he saw him. The commissar came to stand beside him, hands clasped behind his back. You've bound Cadia to alien machines, Darren said quietly. Do you know what the Inquisition will do when they learn? Kyle kept his gaze on the horizon. If Cadia stands, they'll condemn me. If it falls, they'll have nothing left to condemn. Darren was silent for a long moment. You've crossed a line, Marshal. You can't come back from it. I never intended to, Kyle replied. The next day, another patrol vanished. This time, the Vox caught the sounds clearly. Not just metallic shrieks, but words. A voice speaking in perfect Gothic. Return what was promised. Voss sent for Cale immediately. They're not just defending the vault. They want something. Seraphine was already there, her gaze fixed on the schematic. A fragment, a command key. Without it, the vault remains dormant. With it, she trailed off. With it, what? Kyle pressed. She met his eyes. With it, the Necrons could open every pylon on Cadia and close them, at will. By dusk, scouts reported movement in the wastes. Not chaos, but something else. Small, fast-moving shapes, each trailing faint green light. They were headed straight for the fortress. Cale ordered the gates sealed and the walls manned. When the shapes drew close, the defenders saw them clearly. Canoptech wraiths, their segmented bodies twisting through the air, phasing in and out of reality. They made no sound as they slipped over the walls, their claws glinting. The battle in the courtyard was chaos. Laser did little more than scorch their armor. One wraith impaled a sergeant and vanished into the ground with him before anyone could react. Kyle fought at the center, his blade sparking against alien metal. "Hold them here!" he roared. Seraphine moved through the melee like a shadow, her own weapon. A blade of black crystal, slicing through a wraith in a single stroke. "They're searching," she shouted to Cale. "If they find the key..." "They won't," Cale growled, driving his sword through another attacker. At last, the wraiths withdrew, vanishing into the ground as suddenly as they'd appeared. In the aftermath, Kyle realized the obelisk chamber was no longer empty. The black stone now pulsed faster, the light brighter, as if something had been awakened. Seraphine's expression hardened. They didn't find the key, but they found something else. Kyle looked at her sharply. What did they wake? Her voice was barely above a whisper. The part of the pact Akantar didn't tell you about. The fortress slept in uneasy silence. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every faint sound an omen. The wraith attack had left scars both physical and unseen. Walls were patched, bodies burned, prayers murmured. But the air felt thinner, as if something vast was breathing beneath their feet. Kyle stood in the strategium, the hololithic map of Cadia casting its pale glow across his scarred face. Lines of green light pulsed faintly along the continent, each marking a pylon site. Some glowed steady, others flickered. Seraphine entered without a word, the door seals hissing behind her. "You're going to tell me what they woke," Kyle said flatly. The Harlequin tilted her head. "You won't like the answer. Try me." She stepped closer, her eyes like shards of glass. "What sleeps below your fortress is not a weapon. It is a mind, an overlord's tomb, bound by seals older than the pylons themselves. It dreams in silence. But the wraiths have loosened those seals. Kyle's jaw tightened. Why would Akantar leave such a thing here? Insurance, Serathine replied. If Cadia ever failed to keep its part of the bargain, the Overlord would rise, not to destroy chaos, not to save Cadia, but to reclaim this world as his own. Kyle stared at the map. And the key. Serathine reached into her cloak and produced a small metallic shard, its surface shifting like liquid under the light. You've had it all along. The Mechanicus found it in the ruins during the first siege week. They thought it was a data crystal. Before Kale could respond, the Vox on the wall hissed to life. Colonel Voss's voice came through, tight with urgency. Marshal, you need to see this. Long-range augurs show movement, west of the Casa gates. Not chaos. Necron signatures. A lot of them. How many? Kyle asked. Enough to make the last raid look like a drill. On the fortress wall, the horizon shimmered with green fire. Monolithic shapes marched in perfect formation. Warriors, immortals, Triarch stalkers, all moving with the inevitability of a closing trap. Voss gripped the parapet. They're not attacking yet, just advancing. Serathine's voice was quiet. They've come for the key. Kale's hand went to the shard at his belt. They'll have to cut it from me. So the first strike came without warning. From beneath the fortress, the ground ruptured as scarabs swarmed upward in glittering black waves. They poured over the defenders, stripping flesh and armor alike in seconds. Kyle fought shoulder to shoulder with Darren, his power sword carving arcs of light through the tide. We can't hold both above and below, the commissar shouted over the din. Then we hold the vault, Kyle replied. If they reach the Overlord, they'll unleash hell, Darren finished grimly. The descent into the underworks was chaos. The scarabs followed, skittering along walls and ceilings, their mandibles clicking like chattering teeth. Voss's voice crackled in Kale's ear. We're holding the gates, but I don't know for how long. If you've got a plan, now's the time. Kyle glanced at Serathine. You said this key could open or close the pylons. Could it seal the vault? Her expression was unreadable. Yes, but only once, and it will bind what's inside forever. Good, Kyle said. There's more, she added. It will also collapse the pylon network. The barrier over the eye will fall. The choice hit him like a hammer blow. Seal the vault and doom Cadia to the full fury of the eye. Leave it open and risk the Overlord's awakening. Darren's voice cut through his thoughts. Kyle, make the call. He looked at the shard in his hand. Its surface rippled, and for an instant he thought he saw his own reflection. Not as he was, but as something cold and inhuman. They reached the obelisk chamber. The stone was blazing now, the green light so bright it painted their armor sickly. The hybrids they'd fought before were gone, replaced by a single towering figure of living metal, its crown of spines brushing the ceiling. The Overlord's voice filled the chamber without sound. Return what is mine, and I will spare your kind. Kyle raised the shard. That is the first breath of my awakening, the Overlord replied. Give it to me, and I will leave this fortress intact. Serathine whispered. He's lying. He'll take the key and rise anyway. The Overlord stepped forward, each footfall shaking the floor. Scarabs poured in behind him, filling the chamber's edges. Kyle's grip tightened. You want it? Come and take it. The fight was brutal and short. The Overlord moved with impossible speed, his war scythe cleaving stone and steel alike. Kyle's blade met it in a storm of sparks, each blow jarring to the bone. Darren emptied an entire clip from his bolt pistol into the creature's chest. The rounds shattered against its armor, but it slowed just enough for Kale to drive his sword deep into a joint. Seraphine darted in, her black crystal blade severing the Overlord's weapon arm in a burst of green light. Kyle jammed the shard into a recess at the obelisk's base. The entire chamber shuddered as arcs of energy erupted upward, lancing through the walls into the earth. The Overlord screamed, a sound like tearing metal and dying stars, as the obelisk's light flared to blinding intensity. The scarabs convulsed and fell still, their bodies turning to dust. The light snapped out. The obelisk was black once more. When Kyle opened his eyes, the Overlord was gone. Only a scorched mark on the floor remained. Seraphine stood beside him, breathing hard. It's done. The vault is sealed. Forever. Kyle's vox crackled with Voss's voice. Marshal, the pylons, they're going dark. Outside, on the surface, the green lines on the map flickered and died one by one. In the sky above Cadia, the clouds boiled, revealing the raw, howling light of the Eye of Terror. Darren stood beside Kale, his face grim. You've traded one death for another. Kale sheathed his sword. I've traded a quick death for a long fight, and that's all Cadia's ever had. Seraphine's eyes glimmered. The Overlord sleeps again, but so does your shield. Chaos will come, and soon. Kyle looked toward the stairs leading back to the surface. Then we make ready. If this is the last stand, we'll make it a good one. That night, the wind howled through the fortress. In the underworks, deep beyond any living reach, the obelisk pulsed once, faintly, as if something within dreamed still. The morning sky was wrong. Gone was the cold, steady grey of Cadia's eternal overcast. In its place boiled a vortex of colourless flame, the raw wound of the Eye of Terror, unshielded for the first time in millennia. Its baleful light bathed the fortress in hues that no human mind was meant to name. Shadows moved in ways that defied the sun, stretching toward the walls like grasping fingers. Kyle stood on the battlements, the taste of copper thick in his mouth. Every man and woman along the parapets felt it, the psychic pressure of a billion screaming voices pressing down from the warp. Some wept openly, others clenched their jaws until teeth cracked. They'll come soon, Commissar Darren said beside him, his voice steady but his eyes hard. They're already here, Kyle replied. On the horizon, shapes coalesced from the boiling air, a tide of black-armored warriors marching beneath banners of blood and brass. Towering above them strode demon engines, their steel bodies stitched with living muscle and crowned with roaring warp flame. Between the armies of chaos came the cultists, their ragged lines chanting in tongues that made the air quiver. Behind them, like carrion birds over a battlefield, flocks of shrieking furies swirled in, anticipation of the slaughter. Colonel Voss's voice came over the vox. Marshal, the southern gates reinforced, minefields primed. But if they breach in more than one sector, they will, Kale said. We hold each breach until the last, no fallback. Voss hesitated, then understood. Cadia stands. The first wave hit like a storm. Cultists surged forward in a screaming tide, driven by whips and the promise of glory in the eyes of their dark gods. Heavy bolters tore through them in swathes, but for every body that fell, two more clambered over the corpses. Kyle cut down the first to reach the wall, his power sword hissing through flesh and bone. Beside him, Darren's bolt pistol barked with mechanical precision, each shot taking a head or shattering a chest plate. The air filled with the acrid tang of promethium as flame units roared, turning ladders and siege ramps into pyres. Screams rose like smoke into the warping sky. But chaos never spent all its fury at once. A thunderclap split the air as the first defiler reached the wall, its claws digging into the stone, its battle cannon firing point blank into the ramparts. Masonry exploded, hurling guardsmen into the void. "Bring it down," Cael roared, diving clear as the machine's claw smashed where he'd stood. Melter gunners rushed forward, their weapons spitting molten death. The defiler screamed as its torso sagged inward, molten metal dripping like blood, before collapsing in on itself in a burst of unholy light. In the chaos, a deeper sound rolled across the battlefield, the toll of a great iron bell. The chanting of the cultists shifted, growing fevered. From the rift in the sky, something vast and winged descended. It landed beyond the southern breach, its talons carving trenches in the stone. 8 meters tall, armored in brass, and bearing a great axe wreathed in fire, the bloodthirster of Khorne spread its wings and roared. The sound alone shattered men's resolve. Darren's voice was tight. "Marshal, that thing will break the gate in minutes." Kyle's gaze never left the demon. "Then we kill it in one." The fight was madness given form. The bloodthirster smashed through the outer barricade, scattering defenders like leaves. Kyle met it head-on, his sword clashing with the demon's axe in a burst of sparks and raw force that drove him to one knee. Darren and Voss flanked, emptying magazines into the creature's wings and legs, trying to slow it. The demon bellowed in rage, sweeping its axe in an arc that would have taken all 3 heads if Cael hadn't shoved them clear. "Now!" Cael roared. Melter gunners surged from cover, pouring their fire into the demon's chest. The beast staggered, and Cael drove his blade up through its throat, the power field flaring as it cut through bone and warp-spawned sinew. The bloodthirster convulsed, its roar turning to a choking hiss before it dissolved into a storm of ash and fire. They had no time to celebrate. The western wall was already under siege by Chaos Space Marines in crimson and black, their bolters roaring with disciplined malice. Havoc set up heavy weapons positions, cutting down defenders with merciless efficiency. Kyle sprinted to the wall top, arriving in time to see a squad of traitorous Astartes breach the parapet. He met them blade first, his power sword carving through ceramite like paper. Each kill was a duel of inches. Their strength matched his own, their skill as honed as any loyal son of the Emperor. One Marine's chainsword screamed toward his head, but Kyle caught it on his guard and drove a gauntleted fist into the traitor's helm. Bone crunched, blood sprayed. He didn't stop moving. Hours bled together. The fortress was a meat grinder. Each sector they held was bought in blood, and each loss was a wound Cadia could not heal. By nightfall, the walls were cracked in a dozen places. Smoke choked the air. Ammunition was low, and the Voxnet was a litany of last words and death screams. Darren found Kyle at the command post. "Marshal, we can't hold until dawn. They're pushing on every front. We're out of mines, out of artillery shells. If you've got something left in that head of yours, now's the time." Kyle looked at the hololithic map. The breaches were too many, the enemy too strong. But there was one option. "The underworks," Kyle said. Voss frowned. "You mean the sealed vault? It's suicide to—" "No," Kyle interrupted. "The secondary plasma reactors run through there. If we overload them, we can take the fortress with us. Deny Chaos its prize." Darren's eyes narrowed. "You're talking about scouring the entire Casa from the map." Kale met his gaze. I'm talking about ending this on our terms. The decision was made. Orders went out quietly. Civilians had already been evacuated days earlier. Those who survived the Wraith raid. The garrison prepared for their final stand, not with fear, but with grim certainty. Kyle led the last charge himself, driving the enemy back just long enough to buy minutes for the tech priests to overload the reactors. The ground trembled as alarms blared through the fortress. On the walls, the defenders fought like men possessed. Bolters roared, blades clashed. Flamers turned the air to fire. Chaos surged forward, sensing the kill, and met a wall of steel and fury. In the final moments, Kyle stood at the southern gate, his armor dented and scorched, his sword dripping with blood not all his own. Around him, the last Cadians fought to the last breath. Darren fell beside him, a bolt round through the chest. His last words a rasp. Cadia stands. Kyle pressed a gauntlet to his friend's brow, then rose to meet the next charge. The enemy broke, through, and Kyle roared defiance, cutting them down until the world itself split apart. From orbit, the fortress's destruction was a sun blooming on Cadia's surface. The shockwave leveled everything for kilometers, erasing friend and foe alike. In the void above, chaos ships shifted, their assault momentarily staggered. But the eye of terror burned brighter still, and the war for Cadia was far from over. Beneath the ruins, deep in the sealed vault, the obelisk pulsed once more, faint, patient, waiting. The sky above Cadia was no longer a shroud of hope, but a bleeding wound, torn open by war and despair. The once proud fortress stood in ruin, its walls shattered, its battlements cracked like broken bones. The land itself was scorched and scarred, bearing silent testament to the fury unleashed in the desperate final hours. Smoke coiled upwards in endless spirals, as if the planet itself wept in agony. Where once proud banners fluttered, now only tattered rags clung to rusted poles. The air was thick with the smell of burnt promethium, ozone, and something far older, an ancient decay buried beneath the surface. Marshal Kyle stood amidst the ruins, his armor scorched and battered, the weight of survival heavier than the broken blade at his side. The fortress's shattered gates groaned in the wind, and the distant howl of warp storms echoed like a mournful dirge. Around him, the remnants of the garrison moved like ghosts, exhausted, broken, but unyielding. Vox chatter was sparse and fractured, mostly cries for the lost, appeals for reinforcements, or the cold silence of dead channels. The once unified voice of Cadia had been fractured into desperate whispers. Kyle's mind wandered to those he had lost. Commissar Darren's sacrifice haunted him like a shadow, the raspy last words replaying in his ears. Cadia stands. Was it true, or merely a defiant echo in a dying fortress? He looked down at the shard he still carried, the Mechanicus relic that sealed the vault below. A strange calm had settled over it, as if the key itself mourned the ruin it had wrought. "But a marshal." The voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. Colonel Voss approached, her face hard, but her eyes betraying exhaustion. "They're coming," she said simply. Kyle raised a brow. "Who?" "Inquisitors, and not the kind you want at your doorstep." Within hours, strange figures arrived from the void, clad in black and red robes, adorned with the sigils of the Ordo Malleus and Ordo Xenos. Inquisitors stalked through the ruins with a cold purpose, their gaze piercing through layers of dust and despair. One approached Kale, tall and severe, eyes burning with fanatic fire. "Marshal Kale, I am Inquisitor Kalith. The Imperium demands answers, the nature of what transpired here, and why the vault was sealed with alien technology. Kale met the Inquisitor's glare, because the alternative was the destruction of Cadia. The stakes were survival, not politics. Calith's gaze flickered, but his tone remained unwavering. Your choices may have condemned us all. The Inquisitors began their investigations, peeling back the layers of the fortress's demise, their suspicions growing darker with each discovery. They found traces of Necron technology fused with Imperial architecture, glyphs long thought lost to time, and remnants of biomechanical hybrids. Whispers spread among the survivors of forbidden pacts, of ancient evils beneath their feet, and of a power sleeping beneath the sands, waiting for the wrong key to awaken it fully. In the shadowed corridors beneath the ruins, far beyond the reach of the living, the obelisk pulsed once again. Its light was faint, a slow heartbeat in the silence. A new presence stirred, a being older than the galaxy itself, its consciousness stretched across eons of sleep and silence. It watched, it waited. Above, in the ruined command chamber, Kyle sat alone, the weight of empire and failure pressing down on him. The cost of victory, or was it defeat, weighed heavy. He whispered into the void, "Is this what immortality means? To outlive your empire and watch it crumble to dust?" The shard on the table pulsed faintly in response, as if in sorrow. The galaxy beyond Cadia churned on, indifferent to one world's fall. The Eye of Terror writhed, the gates between realities weakening with every passing hour. Chaos whispered promises to those willing to listen, and somewhere deep in the shadows, new schemes began to form. Kyle rose, his eyes hardening with grim resolve. "This is not the end," he said quietly. "Cadia may fall, but the fight goes on, and I will see it through, whatever the cost." The ruin echoed back the silence, broken only by the faint pulsing from below. The skies above Cadia remained a tumultuous swirl of shifting hues, a battlefield between realities, where light and shadow warred beyond mortal comprehension. The Eye of Terror had ripped a gash across the heavens, exposing the fragile veil that separated the Imperium from the endless chaos beyond. Within this maelstrom, voices whispered, not in tongues of men, but in the corrosive hiss of the warp. These voices were old and hungry, clawing at the edges of sanity, promising power and ruin in equal measure. In the ruined command chamber, Marshal Kale sat surrounded by the detritus of war, maps torn, hololithic projectors flickering weakly, and the ever-present shard resting before him like a cold heart. He closed his eyes, feeling the psychic pulse emanating from the shard, faint but insistent, like a beacon calling from the dark. "Marshal Kale," came the distorted voice through the vox. "The warp is restless. The Shalaikas we've salvaged from the fortress are breaking under the pressure. Their minds are unraveling." Kyle opened his eyes to find Colonel Voss standing over him, her face drawn and pale. "What is happening to them?" he asked. "The veil is thinning," she said. "The psychic backlash from the sealed vault and the destruction of the pylons is tearing holes in the fabric between worlds. Madness seeps in." The psychic fallout was not limited to the fortress. Across the sector, Inquisitors and the Adeptus Astra Telepathica reported rising disturbances. Psychers screamed in their cells, visions of starless voids and endless torment, driving them to the edge of sanity. Rumors spread of a new force emerging, something neither chaos nor the Imperium could easily define. a whisper in the warp, a shadow without form. Kyle convened what remained of the fortress's command staff in the shattered strategium. The room was heavy with tension. "We sealed the vault to save Cadia," he began. "But in doing so, we fractured the pylon's network. The barrier that once held the eye at bay is weaker than ever." Seraphine stepped forward, her voice a quiet murmur. "The Overlord sleeps, but its mind reaches out. The warp responds to that stirring. We face threats from both sides, the armies of chaos and the abyss beneath." One of the tech priests spoke up, voice crackling with static. "The Mechanicus has detected anomalies in the warp signatures surrounding the vault. It is as if something is trying to use the fractured pylons as conduits, to amplify a force beyond comprehension." Kyle clenched his fist. "Then we must repair the shield, or find another way to hold back the eye." Voss shook her head. "The damage is too deep. The pylons are intertwined with the Necron vault. Any attempt to restart them risks awakening what lies beneath again." In the quiet moments that followed, a darker thought took root in Cale's mind. The war was not only without, it was within. He looked at Seraphine, who met his gaze unflinchingly. "Loyalty is fragile," he said. "I fear the fractures we face may come not just from chaos or Necron technology, but from our own." She nodded. "Betrayal is the true contagion. In times like these, it festers in the shadows." That night, Kyle's dreams were invaded by whispers, echoes of the Overlord's voice, promises of power and dominion, veiled threats and impossible choices. He awoke with a start, sweat cold on his brow. Had the shards spoken to him, or was it the madness of the warp seeping into his mind? Meanwhile, the Inquisitors worked feverishly. Their investigations unearthed old dossiers, forbidden tomes, and lost prophecies. The nexus of all these horrors was clear. Cadia's fall was only the beginning. One Inquisitor, Lady Mirith, spoke in hushed tones to Kale. "The Imperium faces a darkness unlike any before. The warp grows hungry, and the old alliances, with the Necrons, with the Emperor's will, fray." Kyle nodded. "Then we must prepare for a war on every front, of steel, faith, and mind." The day passed in shadows and whispered fears. Reports came of rogue psychers succumbing to demonic possession, of entire worlds slipping beneath chaos's grasp. In the heart of Cadia's ruins, a new presence stirred, one neither bound by flesh nor machine. Something ancient, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to rise. Kyle stood once more on the battered parapets, gazing at the swirling eye above. "The cost of our choices echoes through the stars," he murmured. "But the fight is not yet over." Behind him, Seraphine's voice was a soft vow. "Together, we will face the darkness, even if it means walking through the shadows to the very edge of the galaxy." The sky over Cadia was a tapestry of dying light and encroaching darkness. The Eye of Terror loomed vast and restless, a wound in the heavens bleeding ceaseless shadows into the world below. Yet it was not just the enemy. Without that threatened the fragile remnants of the fortress. It was the enemy within. Marshal Kyle paced the shattered halls of the command chamber, his armor still bearing the scars of battle, his mind weighed down by whispers of doubt. The shard, silent yet insistent, rested on the cracked table, its surface shimmering faintly like a pool of cold, dark water. Its secret was a burden few could understand, and fewer still could bear. Seraphine stood nearby, watching him with eyes that hid more than they revealed. "The fortress is fractured, Marshal," she said quietly. not just in stone and steel, but in loyalty. The bonds we thought unbreakable are splintering beneath the weight of despair. Kyle stopped, meeting her gaze. You mean betrayal? She nodded slowly. Among the survivors, among those we trusted most. The first signs were subtle. A misplaced order here, a hesitation there. Rumors spread like wildfire. Whispers of secret talks with the enemy, of stolen supplies, of sabotage in the underworks. Kyle's suspicions grew as the Voxnet crackled with cryptic messages and unexplained silences. Inquisitor Calith arrived, his presence a dark shadow in the flickering light. Marshal, the Inquisition has uncovered a network of traitors within the garrison. They worship not the Emperor, but the Void itself. Heretics, Xenos sympathizers, servants of chaos. Kale's jaw clenched. How deep does this rot go? Deeper than you might imagine, Calith replied grimly. The fracture threatens to collapse the last defenses. If we do not act swiftly, Cadia falls from within, long before the enemy breaks the walls. Kyle summoned his closest officers. The room was tense, voices low, eyes guarded. We fight on two fronts, Kale said. Outside these walls, chaos and the unknown forces press their assault. Inside, traitors plot our undoing. Colonel Voss's hand rested on her bolt pistol, eyes sharp. We root them out, or we all die. Darren's ghostly memory lingered in Kale's mind, a stark reminder of sacrifice and loyalty. Trust is our greatest weapon, but also our greatest vulnerability. Days passed in a haze of paranoia and vigilant cruelty. Every shadow became a suspect, every whispered word a potential lie. Trials were swift and merciless. The guilty, when found, were cast into the abyss without ceremony. Yet the rot was not so easily purged. Amid the turmoil, Kale confronted one of his oldest allies, Captain Thane, a man once loyal beyond question. Accused of collusion with the enemy, Thane's denial was fierce, his eyes wild with desperation. You believe me a traitor? Thane spat, voice breaking. I have bled for Cadia. I have lost everything. Kyle's sword hung heavy at his side. Then prove it. The trial was brutal, a tangle of accusations, evidence, and the inescapable fog of doubt. Even as Kyle watched, the line between guilt and innocence blurred, leaving only questions. In the shadowed corridors, Seraphine found herself torn between loyalty to Kyle and the dark whispers that haunted her own past. The Harlequin's dance was one of secrets and lies, her motives veiled beneath layers of shadow. I serve a higher truth, she told Kale one evening, but even I fear what may come when all masks are torn away. Kyle regarded her silently, knowing well the cost of truths too terrible to bear. Outside the walls, the eye's light grew ever more furious, a storm of impossible colors that shattered the sky. The enemy massed anew, sensing weakness in the defenders' ranks. On the ramparts, the weary soldiers waited, not just for battle, but for the betrayals to come. Kyle stood alone in the shattered command chamber as the first alarms sounded. Another breach, another wave of the enemy pressing through the defenses. His mind raced, torn between the enemy without and the enemies within. Fractured allegiances, he murmured. The true battle begins now. The fortress of Cadia groaned beneath the weight of its own decay, its walls battered and bloodied by relentless siege. The eye of terror churned overhead, a ceaseless storm of malevolent light, casting its grim glow upon the broken defenders. But it was not the enemy, without a loan, that shattered the stronghold. It was the crown itself, fractured by treachery and despair. Marshal Cale moved through the command chamber, now a place of shadows and whispers. The air was thick with tension, every breath a reminder of the war, both outside and inside. The garrison was fraying, loyalties splintered like shattered ceramite. Its Captain Thane stood before Cale, his face pale, his hands bound by chains forged in the forges of Mars. The trial had ended in condemnation, the evidence of his betrayal undeniable. Yet the man's eyes burned, not with remorse, but with bitter defiance. "You condemn me for survival," Thane spat. "I did what I must to save what remains of Cadia. You, Cale, condemn the very future we fight for." Cale's gaze was cold steel. Survival without honor is no victory. The traitor's words echoed as Cale turned from the chamber. Outside, the battlefield screamed with fire and fury. The enemy pressed hard against the southern gate, where the scars of recent battles still bled smoke and flame. The bloodthirster's ashes had long since scattered, but its legacy lived on in the burning rage of the Chaos forces. Demons and heretics surged forward in a tide of destruction, seeking to claim the shattered fortress. Amid the chaos, Seraphine moved like a shadow, her black crystal blade flashing as she cut down foes with deadly grace. Yet even her steps faltered beneath the weight of unseen chains. Secrets she carried alone. In a quiet alcove, she confronted Cale. "The crown is broken," she whispered. "Not just the fortress, but those who wear it." Cale met her gaze, the lines of weariness deepening. "Then we must forge a new one, or fall beneath the weight of the old." In the heart of the fortress, the shattered pylons flickered erratically, the shield's last breath before collapse. The obelisk below pulsed faintly, a grim reminder of the power still trapped beneath the earth. The tech priests worked feverishly to stabilize what they could, but their efforts were a race against oblivion. The final assault began in a storm of fire and steel. Cale led his remaining forces through burning corridors and shattered halls. Every step a battle against overwhelming odds. The enemy's claws raked at their armor. Bolters thundered in deafening salvos, and the screams of the dying echoed like a funeral dirge. In the command chamber, Inquisitor Calith confronted Cale. "The traitors have been dealt with," he said grimly, "but the fortress cannot hold. You must choose, evacuate and save what remains, or fight to the last breath." Cale's eyes were hard as obsidian. Cadia does not fall without a fight. The choice was made. Orders went out for a final stand, a desperate gamble to buy time for the Imperium's forces to regroup. Amidst the flames, Cale found himself face to face with a figure draped in shadow, the source of much whispered fear among the survivors. A chaos sorcerer, eyes glowing with dark fire, stepped forth to challenge him. Their battle was fierce and terrible. Kyle's sword clashed with the sorcerer's warped staff, sparks of psychic energy igniting the air between them. Words were exchanged, threats and curses born of hatred and desperation. Kyle fought not just for survival, but for the memory of those lost and the future that might yet be won. The fight ended with a clash that shattered the chamber's stones. The sorcerer fell, but not before unleashing a final curse, a promise that the darkness would never truly be driven back. Kyle stood alone amidst the ruin, breath ragged, the crown of Cadia broken but still worn. Outside, the last defenders rallied for one final charge. The fortress echoed with their cries, a song of defiance against the coming night. As dawn broke over the shattered horizon, The Eye of Terror pulsed once more, a storm waiting to consume all. Kyle's voice was a vow carried on the wind. This is not the end, not while we still breathe. And in the darkness below, the obelisk pulsed, patient, eternal, waiting for the hour when all would come undone. The skies above Cadia burned with the dying light of 1,000 suns, though none shone bright. The Eye of Terror churned, a roiling tempest of chaos and ruin, its grasp tightening like a noose about the world's throat. The fortress, once a bastion of imperial might, now lay in ruins, its stones soaked in the blood of heroes and traitors alike. Marshal Kyle stood amidst the shattered remnants of the command chamber, the weight of his failures pressing upon him like a crushing tide. His armor, battered and scorched, bore the scars of countless battles. His eyes, once fierce and resolute, now flickered with the haunting shadows of doubt and regret. The final assault had been merciless. The traitors and demons pressed forward with unholy fury, their claws rending flesh and steel alike. Kyle had fought with the desperation of a man who knew the end was near, each strike a prayer, each breath a defiance against oblivion. Beside him, Seraphine moved like a spectre, her crystal blade carving through enemies with lethal grace. But even she could not shield them from the inexorable tide. The obelisk beneath the fortress pulsed with a dreadful light, its power awakening from the depths. It was a beacon, a call to the ancient forces that slumbered beneath Cadia's shattered bones. From the depths, the Overlord stirred, its presence a dark promise of destruction and rebirth. Kyle knew the truth now. The vault had been more than a prison. It was a seed of apocalypse, waiting for the right moment to bloom. In a moment of grim clarity, Kyle turned to his remaining commanders. "We cannot hold this place," he said, "but we can choose how it ends." The decision was made. The fortress would be destroyed from within, its power unleashed to consume the Eye itself. It was a gamble born of desperation, a pyrrhic hope to stem the tide of darkness. As the detonations began deep beneath the surface, the ground shook with the fury of a dying world. The walls cracked, the pylons faltered, and the ancient power surged forth in a wave of energy that tore through the fabric of reality. The battlefield became a maelstrom of fire and light, a cosmic storm where friend and foe alike were consumed. Amid the chaos, Kyle faced his greatest betrayal. Captain Thane, thought dead or lost to treachery, emerged from the shadows, his eyes gleaming with madness and ambition. "You would see Cadia die to save your pride," Thane spat. "But I offer salvation, power beyond the Emperor's grasp." Kale's blade met Thane's in a clash that shook the heavens. Their duel was not merely of steel, but of ideology. Survival versus sacrifice. Ambition versus duty. The fight raged through the collapsing halls, their blades sparking against shattered stone. Thane's madness was a poison, but Kale's resolve burned brighter still. With a final, desperate strike, Kale shattered Thane's defenses, sending the traitor crashing into the abyss below. The fortress trembled as the final explosions rocked its foundations. Kale, Seraphine, and the last of their loyal forces made their escape through tunnels carved long ago. Behind them, Cadia's heart, its obelisk, erupted in a cataclysm of light and shadow. From the wreckage rose a new dawn, but it was one of ashes and sorrow. Cadia was no more. Yet from the ruins, hope flickered like a dying ember. The survivors vowed to carry the legacy forward, to fight on in the Emperor's name, even as the galaxy plunged deeper into darkness. Kyle looked to the horizon, his voice a whisper lost in the wind. The phoenix rises from the ashes, but the flames will never forget. And beneath the shattered world, the Overlord stirred, its patience eternal, its promise of doom far from fulfilled. The remnants of Cadia's defenders gathered beneath a sky bruised and broken, the eye of terror's malignant glow casting a sickly pall over the shattered world. The fortress was lost, consumed by fire and despair, but a spark lingered, fragile, flickering, yet unyielding. Marshal Cale stood on the precipice of oblivion, the weight of the Empire's fall pressing upon him with relentless gravity. His armor bore the scars of endless conflict, his heart the burden of impossible choices. Around him, the last loyal forces prepared for one final stand. Word had come of a new threat, a chaos warlord risen from the ashes, rallying the scattered heretics and demons into a storm that threatened to sweep the survivors into oblivion. Kyle knew that the coming battle would decide not only the fate of Cadia's legacy, but the future of the Imperium itself. "Hold fast," Kyle commanded, voice resolute despite the weariness that gnawed at his soul. "This is our last light in the darkness. We fight not for glory, but for the memory of those who fell." Beside him, Seraphine's eyes gleamed with a cold fire. Even in the depths of shadow, a light endures. The battlefield was a maelstrom of violence. Bolter fire roared like thunder, chainswords sang their deadly hymns, and the screams of the fallen echoed through the crumbling ruins. The air was thick with the stench of ozone and blood, the very earth shaking beneath the fury unleashed. Kyle fought with grim determination, each strike a testament to a promise made long ago, that Cadia would not fall without a fight. Yet even amidst the fury, betrayal reared its venomous head once more. One of Kyle's trusted lieutenants, corrupted by despair and whispers from the warp, turned against them. His treachery shattered the fragile unity, threatening to unravel all that remained. In the chaos, Seraphine faced the traitor alone, their blades clashing beneath the shattered sky. The duel was swift and brutal, a dance of death where only one could emerge. With a final, decisive strike, Seraphine ended the threat, but not without cost. Her strength waned, and the shadows of the warp clawed at her mind, a price paid for loyalty in a world consumed by darkness. As the tide of battle shifted, the Chaos Warlord emerged, a towering figure wreathed in flame and corruption, his voice a roar that shook the heavens. Kyle confronted him, steel against dark sorcery, determination against malice. Their clash was the culmination of endless conflict, the ultimate test of will. The fight raged through the ruins, their blows shaking the earth and bending reality. Kyle's resolve wavered, but the memory of Cadia's fallen steel his heart. With a final, desperate strike, Kyle drove his blade through the warlord's heart. The corrupted giant fell, his death a Pyrrhic victory that brought precious moments for the survivors. But the cost was great. Kyle fell to his knees, wounded beyond reckoning, the weight of his wounds and the weight of his choices dragging him toward the abyss. Seraphine knelt beside him, her voice a whisper in the dying light. "You carried the last light, Marshal. Now, let it guide you home." And the survivors gathered around, their faces etched with grief and determination. Cadia's fall was complete, but its spirit endured, a beacon for those who would continue the fight. Kyle's eyes closed, a final breath slipping into the void. The empire he had led was no more, but its legacy burned bright in the hearts of the few who remained. As the Eye of Terror pulsed overhead, the final light of Cadia flickered, fragile yet unbroken. The galaxy remained a dark and uncertain place, but in the shadows, hope still whispered. The last light of Cadia flickered beneath a sky rent by chaos and silence alike. The once proud fortress world, cradle of defiance against the Eye of Terror, had crumbled to dust and memory. Its shattered towers lay broken like the bones of an ancient leviathan, half swallowed by the void's indifferent embrace. Marshal Cale's body was gone, claimed by the final battle's fury, but his spirit lingered, woven into the fabric of the ruined world he had fought to defend. His sacrifice was a beacon, a somber flame in the unending night. Across the galaxy, stars burned cold and distant. Empires rose and fell like the tides, their legacies swallowed by time's relentless march. Immortality, once the dream of kings and gods, revealed itself as a curse, a burden heavier than the strongest armor. To live through millennia was to witness endless cycles of hope and ruin, to bear the scars of betrayal anew with each dawn. The cost of such eternity was loneliness and the slow erosion of purpose. In the shadowed halls of the Imperium's heart, the tale of Cadia's fall was whispered, sometimes in reverence, sometimes in fear. The shattered world had become a symbol of sacrifice, of futility, of the fragile flame of hope that burned against a darkness that sought to consume all. Some spoke of the obelisk's power, buried beneath the ashes, waiting for the right hand to wield or the wrong one to unleash catastrophe. Elsewhere, in the endless void between stars, the Overlord stirred, its consciousness ancient, vast beyond comprehension. Patient and eternal, it waited for the galaxy's balance to tip once more, for the seeds of its return to take root. Time was its ally. Immortality was its domain. Yet the cycle was not ended. From Cadia's ashes rose new heroes, new leaders forged in the crucible of loss and shadow. Their eyes were steeled with the memory of the fallen, their hearts heavy with the weight of legacy. The fight would continue, because the darkness never sleeps, and neither would those who stood against it. In the quiet void, where stars died and were born anew, the memory of Cadia burned bright, a solemn flame lighting the way for those yet to come. The galaxy's story was written in blood and sacrifice, in betrayal and loyalty, in the rise and fall of empires. And so it would be, until the stars themselves grew cold, and the last light faded into silence. The end